Hey, all right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. You guys are too kind. So, my name is Eric, and I do ERP implementations for a living. Yeah, I see your faces. It's the same look my therapist gives me. Yeah, this guy knows what I mean over here. I see you, man. Well, here's the thing. 80% of these projects fail. Let that sink in. You have better odds at the blackjack table in Vegas. And at least Vegas gives you a free drink while it ruins you. Yeah, this guy knows what I mean over here.
Vegas, baby.
You've been there a few times, right? I can tell. So companies spend $50 million on software, and you know what the research says? Only 3% of success comes from the technology. 3%. The other 97%, it's people. So congratulations. You bought a Ferrari to fix a problem named Dave in accounting. Oh, man. You know Dave, right? We all have one in our companies, right?
Dave sucks.
And then the vendor demos, it's all integrated. It's AI powered. It works out of the box. My friends, vendor demos are like first dates. No one mentions the ex, the debt, or the cat. And then the system integrator shows up. They sold you the senior partner. They send you Braden. Braden graduated on Tuesday. Braden is learning SAP on your dime and on Halloween. Ask Hershey's how that one ends. You remember that one from the 90s? Yeah, you're old enough to remember. Yeah, me too. Ask Lola about their 500 million euro write-off. Ask Birmingham City Council how a 20 million pound project became 113 million. And then leadership says, we don't need change management. Oh, you give change a bad name. Yeah, you remember Bon Jovi? Yeah, that's what leaders are saying right now.
Not Bon Jovi.
Look, there are no silver bullets. The technology is the easy part. Humans are the hard part. All right. And watch out for the consultants. Thank you, everyone. I'll be here all quarter.
Awesome.
Take care. All right. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
If only ERP projects were funny enough to do stand-up comedy behind. Hopefully you enjoyed that. That's a new concept. I tested out on social media and some of the short formats like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And what I like about the video is not only poking fun at what we do every day in this industry, but also just calling out some of the nuances, related to people and, Dave in accounting, the guy that won't change, the guy that resists change. And, some of the leadership issues, not focusing on change management. I try to make it funny and poke fun at it, but that's the reality of ERP projects and digital transformations. And today's episode 271 of Transformation Ground Control, we're going to dive into a lot of stuff related to this. Of course, we always talk about everything related to ERP and digital transformation. This is a tech agnostic podcast. If you haven't listened before, thanks for being here today. I'm your host, Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting Group. And we've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk with Karm Saliba, who's a director at Third Stage Consulting, where I work. And he's managed some pretty large, complex global ERP implementations. And in particular, we're going to talk about a specific case study, a multi-year, multinational SAP S/4HANA implementation. And even if you're not implementing SAP, it's still really good in terms of talking to him about lessons and some of the overall case study. And what's great about this, too, is that Karm is a former client of ours. So this case study we're going to talk about is actually a Third Stage client. We've since hired Karm as a director here. So the client has now become the consultant. So he's going to give his perspective of having been in the client side of things for many years, running a very large, complex project for a multi-billion-dollar multinational organization. So great lessons in there that are going to be relevant in any sort of implementation that you might be going through. We're going to get to a few things here today that I'm excited about. I'm going to start off the episode by talking about this new policy that SAP has rolled out related to their API. They've got a new API policy, and it's created quite interesting conversation online. And one of the things that I did is I like I always do, tried to be part of that conversation and stimulate some of the conversation. And what I want to do is share with you a video that I shared on social media. And I'd love to get your reaction to this because, some people like what I had to say, some didn't. So I'm really curious to hear what you all think about this video. Well, SAP is at it once again, dictating to customers architecture decisions that really shouldn't be up to a vendor. This is news from just a few days ago that states that SAP now no longer will allow APIs, which are integration points between SAP and third-party solutions, unless it's something that's been officially published by SAP. SAP is saying that you may only use SAP published APIs and SAP endorsed data access mechanisms, and only for their documented purposes. Think about that for a minute. In other words, what they're saying is we don't care what custom APIs you might have developed. We don't care that you might want to integrate with a third-party system that they don't authorize. What they're trying to do is hide under the guise of security and compliance, which I'm calling BS on. That is not the reason why they're doing this. The reason they're doing this is because this is how SAP operates, first and foremost. But second of all, they want to have control and dictate to customers architecture decisions that should rest in the hands of customers. If customers are paying for the software, I don't think a software vendor should be telling customers how they can or can't use the software, as long as it's legal and within reason. SAP has a long and rich history of unilateral decisions that benefit them and harm their customers. You don't have to look any further than their 2030 mandate to get off of BCC, to get rid of all the customizations that have been built over years and years. And you can say it's all in the name of technical debt and updating and modernizing, but that should be the customer decision, not the software vendor's decision. The good news in all of this, though, if there's a silver lining, is that this story, this news, coincides very nicely with the timing of the release of my book, which is called Welcome to the Machine. In this book, I talk about SAP and companies like SAP, the behaviors they undertake, and the way it adversely impacts their customers. Now, in this book, I don't just blame vendors. I also talk about consultants and how their interests are misaligned with customers. And I talk about the internal dysfunctions that organizations face, the actual end customers face. So it's not just about bashing vendors, but vendors play a huge part in contributing to ERP failures, overspend, lack of ROI. The industry only needs to look internally to recognize what that is. SAP. So that is the video I published recently on social media. And I'd love to hear your feedback on this topic, because this is a really interesting topic that actually ties into a broader conversation around vendor lock, the rights of customers versus the rights of vendors. And there's just a lot of interesting discussion that I've been part of online related to this. And this is part of why I like putting out content like this, because part of why I do it is to say what no one else will say. And although I think a lot of people are thinking this, apparently based on the feedback, but I also do it to get a reaction. I want to see the counterpoints, and I actually learn a lot from the counterpoints. I do appreciate even people that completely disagree with me or don't like what I have to say. But one of the things that an SAP employee, someone who said they're an SAP employee, and their comment was something to the effect of, what else are we supposed to do? We have to protect our interest, which I thought was a really interesting comment. And I get it, right? SAP is running a business. They're not a charity. They're not here to necessarily make the world a better place. They're here to sell software and make money, just like a lot of us are. And I understand that. I respect that. So I think where I struggle, though, and I'd love to get the audience feedback on this, because I'm not sure where I land on this. I tend to look at things, maybe if I am biased, if I have one bias, it's that I look at things maybe too much from the client lens, the end client, and kind of how things affect them. Because we're not affiliated with SAP or any other software vendor, I don't always think the way maybe I should about the interests of ERP software vendors. And so, but at the same time, I do understand they have to make money, right? They've got to, they can't, for example, I've been critical of the 2030 migration deadline to move from legacy SAP products to S/4HANA. I've been critical of that, but I also understand that SAP can't in perpetuity be managing multiple solutions. They can't be managing S/4HANA, public and private cloud, ECC, R3, all these different systems that they've had over the years. Obviously, at some point, you've got to decommission them or sunset them. So I get that. It's nothing new to sunset a product. I think the key here, though, is that the timeline was pretty compressed for very large multinational companies to presumably move off of their legacy systems, especially when they had so much customization tied up in their legacy systems in many cases. And that's not an easy lift and shift by any means. It's very messy, very complex, very risky, very costly. So, but having said that, I understand why SAP is doing what they're doing in that case. This case is interesting too, because actually I was very shocked to see this news, not because it's not unlike SAP, because it is, but because they have recently been in trouble or had regulatory issues in the European Union in particular, where the EU is investigating them. And to be clear, it's not just them. I think they're also looking into Microsoft for similar but different things. But there has been some allegations of anti-competitive behavior, from what I understand, in the EU. And so, they haven't been found guilty of anything yet. They're still trying to negotiate with the EU things that'll satisfy regulators there. But some of the areas that they've had regulatory issues, and I think a lawsuit as well. Salonis is a business process mining software and a company that makes business process mining software. And historically, Salonis, the whole view of Salonis, or the whole value of it, is it can go into other, any kind of system and mine the data to see what the processes in the transaction really look like. What are the real end-to-end cycle times? What are the real variations in the process? How is the software really being used? Not just how people are telling you they're using it, but how they're really using it. And so the reason I bring this up is because Salonis has historically been able to access S4HANA and process mine S4HANA, but then SAP went out and they bought a business process mining tool called Signavio. And once they bought Signavio, they cut off Salonis's ability to access S4HANA to do the same thing that Signavio does. So that's part of where they're running into. That's one legal hurdle they're facing, is that there's allegations that they've limited competition to favor their own business process mining tools. So again, I get it, right? They make this big acquisition of Signavio. They want people to use Signavio. Makes sense. But the big question I have for the audience here is whose interests are more important? The SAP in preserving their profit, or is it by providing choice to customers and letting the customers decide if they want Signavio or Salonis, or if they want to move to S4HANA, when do they move to S4HANA? So back to this API thing, this policy that was just released last month in April of 2026, the whole rationale here is that, and what they're doing is they're saying that they only will allow API access to S4HANA if they've approved it, if it's been sanctioned by SAP. And so the fear here, and it's not a done deal yet, this may or may not happen, but based on the way SAP typically operates, I wouldn't be surprised if this happens. But the fear is that they will discontinue the ability to access non-SAP tools that they don't like. For example, if you've got, if you've got a homegrown legacy system, they may or may not allow you to continue to integrate to that. And I guess where I struggle here is not only are you limiting options for customers, but you're also making it extremely difficult for them to have integration points that they might have to have. I mean, there's regulatory types of things. Every industry has different regulatory systems they need to integrate to. And there might be best of breed solutions that handle the system or the needs of the business better than SAP could. So, why not give customers that choice to find that solution rather than forcing them to stay within the SAP ecosystem? Now, one thing SAP has said in their PR about this so far, which, by the way, I don't think they've handled it very well. The PR has not been, the way they've messaged this has not been good. It's not very clear. They haven't really come out, at least at the time I'm recording this podcast episode. I don't believe they've come out and made any formal, no one's come out and talked about it and had open discussion about it, but they have a site on, or a posting on their website that explains it. And what they're saying there is that, it's limiting customer options. So what I'd love to hear from they're not saying it's limiting customer options. That's my opinion, but I'd love to hear from the audience here what you think. Is this right of them to do? Should they be more concerned about customers' best interest and what they want to do? Let the free market decide. Love to hear your feedback on this. And this reminds me of a meme that I recently posted on social media, and it was a meme related to SAP, and it's pokes fun. This is meant to be funny, but trying to be light about it as well. But one of the criticisms of SAP over the years is that they lock you in. And this is, to be fair, is the goal of a lot of software vendors. SAP just happens to be the biggest 800-pound gorilla, so their attempts to lock customers into a certain ecosystem and lock them into a specific roadmap and path, one size fits all approach, isn't, it's more profound, or it's more magnified with them just because they're such a big organization. So sort of a play on Hotel California by the Eagles here. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that's Hotel SAP. For those of you listening to the audio version that can't see the graphic, it's a meme that mimics the cover of Hotel California, but turns it into a fun play on Hotel SAP. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave, to use the quote from the Eagles. So curious to hear what your thoughts here on this. One other thing I'll mention too is SAP has made the comment that the reason they're doing this, this whole thing with cutting off API support or limiting API support, is for security reasons. And I'm not so sure I believe that, because there are other ways. You don't need to have everyone only operating within SAP for something to be secure. As long as someone's not able to access the code of SAP or break the core SAP system at the public cloud level, I don't see why you would need to limit integration points. I think that's the customer's responsibility and the customer's risk and the customer's decision to make, as long as it doesn't affect other customers and as long as it doesn't affect SAP as a company. So in other words, if I am paying a lot of money for an implementation and for a software and for the data to reside in that software, I should be able to do whatever I want with it. And if I decide to do something stupid or something that's high risk, and I may or may not be making an educated decision, doesn't really matter. That's my prerogative, and I am the one that would live with the consequences of that if I'm a customer. And that's my view of it. Now, I struggle with this whole concept of holding a customer's data hostage potentially. I mean, it's crazy to me that now we're all marching toward the cloud, which is, you're giving up a certain amount of control there. But now we're marching to the cloud. We're adding AI agents and upgrades that we don't have control over necessarily, week to week, month to month. Now you throw in this whole concept of not being able to access your own data or not being able to integrate your own data to other systems as you would like. I find that hard to believe. I mean, it baffles me that we as an industry tolerate this, because it just doesn't seem right to me. And I think, I know SAP's got to run their business, like I said, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to hurt them. I think it's actually going to hurt them more than it helps them. I think right now in the short term, it sounds good in theory, but I think the blowback of that API policy combined with the 2030 deadline, combined with just other actions that SAP has taken over the years, I think eventually they're going to end up in a situation where they aren't the 800-pound gorilla anymore. I just don't see how you can operate with that level of hubris or arrogance and just strategic blindness to what's going on in the market around you. Now, I think they're also feeling very threatened by AI, and I think that's part of what they're doing too, is they seem to be limiting, wanting to cut off access, AI agents being able to access SAP data. And when I say SAP data, by the way, it's actually your data, it's customer data. So if I've got my own data in SAP, that's my data. That's not SAP's data. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not here to argue the legal merits of that comment. I'm speaking as a business practical person that would say, I would argue to you that the data in an ERP system is your data, not the vendor's. Therefore, they shouldn't be telling you what you can or can't do with that data. So that's my take on it. Love to hear your feedback on it. We're going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to give you a couple case studies. I want to talk through a couple of these case studies before we get to our guest. And I'm going to talk about, in particular, Zimmer Biomet and Haribo. We're going to talk about those two case studies, and we'll talk about some of the challenges they faced, and that's going to be a nice segue into the conversation with Karm, where we talk about successful SAP implementation. Not perfect, but it was successful. There's a lot of good lessons that we have from it, and I really look forward to having that conversation. So stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or a free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. I'm excited for our guest coming up here in just a moment. His name is Karm Saliba, and he's a director at Third Stage, former client of Third Stages, and he was a client before he became a consultant here. And now he helps us lead and manage some of our most complex ERP projects, including some of our SAP implementations. Before we bring him on, though, I want to share with you a couple case studies, a couple public profile or publicly published case studies. And the reason I want to share this stuff is because these are just good, interesting case studies that I think we can all learn from. And the first one is Zimmer Biomet. This is a recent SAP project that didn't go well. So, we'll start with the bad news in this podcast by talking through challenging case studies, and then we'll get to Karm's discussion of a more successful case study. And I think you'll appreciate the contrast between the two. So this is Zimmer Biomet, $25 billion medical device company, implemented SAP. And what was interesting here is not only did they have a troubled, failed implementation that took a lot longer than expected and a lot more money than expected, but they also had some very material market capitalization and profitability issues or damages as a result. They lost revenue as a result of the implementation, so they could attribute some of their decline in revenue to the fact that their SAP system, their rollout, didn't go well, and they weren't able to manage the processes very effectively. And they also had a $2 billion market cap drop after going live. So in addition, here's where it gets really ugly. So they had a $2 billion drop in market cap, $75 million in annual revenue that was attributed to the failed implementation. Again, that's not just $75 million of oops, we spent too much money. That's more, we lost a recurring annual revenue stream as a result of a broken process or a broken rollout, presumably. And the real bad part, in my opinion, is that they laid off 3% of their staff, and they attributed a large part of that to the ERP failure. And that's just unfortunate. I mean, anytime you look at how much money vendors and consultants are making from these projects, to leave a company like Zimmer Biomet in the dust, just out to fend for themselves in a situation where they're worse off than before the implementation, that's super unfortunate. And to be clear, I don't think this, based on what I know about this case, I don't think this is because S/4HANA was a flawed product or it couldn't handle what Zimmer Biomet needed. I think there were organizational dysfunctions and behavioral dysfunctions between Zimmer Biomet, SAP, and their system integrator, which was Deloitte. And now Deloitte's getting sued for $172 million in alleged damages. And so this is a pretty big deal, pretty big case study. And, when you look at some of the lessons here for executives, one of the things is, don't sole source. From what I understand, Zimmer Biomet sole sourced the project to Deloitte. It happens all the time with the big four. They have a way of weaseling their way into projects and or into companies and getting these sole source projects. Just because they're your auditor, because they did an IT project for you one time, doesn't mean they're the best option for you to do a big complex S/4HANA implementation, especially when this is a big, broad business transformation. And maybe there's probably, companies out there that maybe could have handled this better than Deloitte. I don't know. I don't know, who the team members were, or how the approach they took. But that's just speculation based on what I've seen in the industry from other big four consulting firms. And there was leadership turnover and internal changes. So the company was a bit of a moving target as the SAP project was going. They had leadership turnover, strategic changes, operational changes. So it made, locking down the process and the workflows and the requirements and the expectations of the system, it made that very difficult. So I don't know that anyone could have overcome that dynamic or that challenge, or at the very least that alone would have made this project very difficult. They allowed costs to grow by 30% without proper oversight. So they didn't seem to have the right governance in place to manage Deloitte, to manage the project, to manage the work streams. They didn't have an unrealistic budget. When you look back at the initial budgets they had, they clearly weren't realistic. And one of the things that this is more of a recent thing that I think organizations can learn from is you can be using AI as an oversight tool. We do it all the time with our clients. I mean, our own projects, I'm constantly monitoring the risks on each of these projects because now I have access to all the projects in a way that I never did before. So, those are some of the challenges that I think these guys faced. And of course, they lost investor trust as a result of it as well. So those are some of the big challenges that this company faced at Zimmer Biomet. And when you look at those lessons learned, a lot of them are things that I cover in this book. So my book, Welcome to the Machine, is out now. You can get paperback, you can get hardcover, you can get electronic anywhere in the world. It'll ship to anywhere in the world. But this book, the reason I wrote it is because I wanted to talk about the dysfunctions in this industry. And, in the past, I've written a lot about case studies and failures and things like that. I've studied them to death. I've analyzed expert witness cases that I've been involved with, which is about 60 or so expert witness cases. I've testified in several of those, been deposed in several of those. So all along the way, I'm constantly learning from project failures, recoveries, and of course, our own day-to-day implementations where we start from the beginning with a client. But one thing I hadn't really done until this book is really analyze more of the systemic breakdowns and problems and the behavioral, organizational, cultural issues that lead to failure. And the bad news is that I don't think it can be changed overnight. It hasn't changed in 30 years I've been doing this. It's all been the same stuff. It's the same patterns. It's the same behavior. It's the same conflicts of interest. It's the same issues. And so in this book, I unpack end customer, vendor, system integrator, three parties. And there's three main parts to the book where I talk about each of their dysfunctions and how each of those three parties' dysfunctions all fuel like a machine of failure. And it actually is a very effective machine. It's working as designed, which is to sell a lot of software and to sell a lot of services behind it. But the bad news is it's leaving customers behind, and customers are failing as a result of that. So think about this. When you have a failure like Zimmer Biomet or any of these projects, who are the two? There's two of the three parties between vendor, system integrator, and customer. Two of those three parties are guaranteed success. They are guaranteed to come out financially ahead. And the bad news is it's not the customer. The customer is the only one that will end up worse off if things don't go well. And for 80% or more, it doesn't go well. So 80% of the time, vendors and system integrators are doing better financially. Customers aren't. So think about that for a minute. That's a very startling conflict of interest, very concerning. I find it disturbing. Again, it's not going to change overnight, but what I talk about in the book in part 4, which is the conclusion, or the final part of the book, is I talk about how to navigate it, what you can do to manage and harness the machine and contain it and just limit its damage. If you kind of understand how all the gears work, you understand the conflicts of interest, you understand how consulting firms and vendors work, you understand your own internal dysfunctions that you have as a culture and as a operations and as a leadership team. Once you understand all these pieces, again, it's not to criticize anyone necessarily. I'm not trying to bash vendors or SIs or end customers, certainly not them. But what I am trying to do is say there's a problem here. There's a problem with the machine. There's a problem with the system, the way we've built this industry. And to be smart about it, you've got to understand the machine to navigate it. So be sure to check out the book. I enjoyed writing it. I think it's really good. I'm totally biased, I'll admit, but I think it's a very good book. It's by far my favorite of the 3 that I've written. So be sure to check it out. You can get it on Amazon. There's a link below. You can get it physically or electronically anywhere in the world. So that's one case study. Now, the other case study I want to talk about is Haribo. So if you're familiar with Haribo, they are a candy company. And I recently posted this infographic on LinkedIn where I talk about Haribo's ERP failure. I talk about how gummy bears almost were obsolete as a result of a failed ERP project. This too was an SAP project. SAP shows up a lot more in these big failure case studies, mainly because when Haribo fails, you hear about them. If a mid-market food company that no one's ever heard of fails implementing something other than SAP, you're not going to hear about it because it's not as well known of a company. So in SAP's defense, you're going to hear SAP a lot more because household brand name companies are more likely to be using SAP. So keep that in mind too. But this is back to 2018. They're trying to implement SAP to improve their supply chain, but they had a bunch of issues. They didn't test adequately before go live, which led to a bunch of glitches in the system in production. They didn't have data migration figured out. It's very poor data migration. So the system was flawed, or the system wasn't flawed, but the data in the system was flawed, which led people to abandon the system because the data wasn't working or the data wasn't accurate. Lack of employee training created issues and confusion and resistance to change. And what ended up happening, the impact on Haribo, was they had severe shortages of gummy bears, distribution chaos, empty shelves, 100 million in lost sales, and sales and earnings, I should say, 100 million euros of lost sales and earnings. And some of the lessons learned are you need thorough testing, proper data migration, and make sure you've got complete training. So the good news in all of this is that when we look at these case studies, there's some common lessons learned that we can all learn from. It's not rocket science. It's not super complicated. When you hear some of the lessons learned and when we hear Karm talk, there's nothing that I don't think he's going to say anything that's, totally off the wall or some secret thing that no one's ever thought of. It's just the way that they executed, the way they led the project. They were not led. They didn't go in blind. They didn't have that learned helplessness that a lot of organizations have. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. So we're going to shift gears and we'll bring Karm onto the show and we'll talk about some of his lessons from having done so many SAP and large global ERP types of projects. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, the tech agnostic view of the digital transformation space. I'm excited for our next guest, Karm Saliba. I always enjoy talking to Karm, and I've always enjoyed chatting with him ever since I met him several years ago as a client. And when I first met him, what's really interesting is when I met Karm, he was an engineering type of guy. He knew the business really well. He had some technical chops. He's a very technical person in general, very hands-on, very detail-oriented, but he can also think big picture and strategic, and he can kind of pivot around and move between technology, people, process, in a way that I think is required as a good consultant, but certainly as a client, you don't see it that often. In fact, it's hard for us to hire people at Third Stage because that's what our expectation is. It's hard to find those people that know, they can pivot back and forth between people, process, technology, strategy. They can go up at a high level and see the big picture, but then dive down into the weeds. And he's just one of those rare people that can sort of navigate all the quadrants or all the layers of change. And when I first met him, it was really funny because he was so he was recruited to be the leader internally of this company's digital transformation, which ended up being an SAP project. And he didn't know, he's the first to admit that he didn't really know what he was doing. He I remember meeting him, and he seemed like he felt like he might be over his head, but confident guy, but still uncertain. And I just remember thinking, this guy's gonna be fine. Like, he's gonna be totally fine. I'm sure, it was like drinking from a fire hose when he first got started, but I knew right away that he'd be fine because he had those raw skills, that understanding of the business. He knew the business really well. He'd been there a long time. He knew the leadership well. He understood the culture. He understood the strengths and weaknesses. He had a strong executive sponsor supporting him. The CFO was very strong, and he just had a lot of the pieces in place that you would hope to see. And quite frankly, so many clients we go into don't have any of that stuff, and then they hire us and want us to somehow fix it. And yeah, we can make things better. We can give them a better chance of success. But it's not nearly as ideal as when you have all that stuff yourself, to start with. And then you hire a consulting firm like us, and you get just so much more value out of them because they can actually, make a bigger impact when you have those foundational things in place. So I'm really excited to have Karm on. He's actually been on my podcast before. Back when he was a client, he was on my Journey to S4HANA podcast, which is a limited podcast series I did a couple years ago, and we'll have another season of that here coming up soon. But you can go to journeyto s4hana.com if you want to check out that podcast. You can also find it on Spotify and Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon, all the usual places. The same place you find this podcast, you can find Journey to S4HANA. So be sure to check that out. But having said that, we're glad to have him here on this show in a new role. He's a little bit older, a little more wiser than the last time he was on, and we're really excited to have him. So Karm, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to it.
Yeah, I look forward to today as well. And you've have quite the interesting background that spans not only SAP, but more importantly, an engineering and business background. And that's why I think some of the lessons you have to share here today are going to be so interesting. But before we get into all that, just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, just sort of your upbringing and background.
Sure. My name is Karm Saliba. The funny accent that you hear is because I grew up in South Africa. I've been living in the US for about 10 years now, but I grew up in South Africa. I am an industrial engineer. I've spent my entire career, 23 years in industrial manufacturing, so large-scale global manufacturing companies, starting with automotive and then moving on to more refrigeration, cooling, that sort of thing, global industrial manufacturing. And my career has really been spent at the place where business process meets technology. So from machines to software to hardware, but really where those tools come into play within the business process, and making sure that the business process fits and achieves the goals that the company has set out for themselves. So yeah, and then I've joined Third Stage a little while ago, so I'm new to the consulting world. But yeah, so far it's been a blast. Really enjoying it.
Yeah, interesting. You have interesting background, kind of sort of three chapters of your career. It seems like you've got the business engineering one, the chapter where you get into the SAP stuff, and now the third chapter getting into consulting, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a nice evolution.
Yeah, you get to see it all. So so tell us a little bit, I guess, before I get into some of the questions I have for you. And by the way, any questions the audience has, please drop those in the chat. Love to hear from you as well. And also, just if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today too. We'd love to hear where in the world you're joining. But before we get into some of the questions I've got for you and the audience has for you, just tell us a little bit about the project itself. Could you just set us up or give us a backdrop of what the project was and how it came to be?
Yep. So the company is a global manufacturer in evaporative cooling equipment, and global company, factories all around the world, footprint in every continent. And really the company was growing very, very quickly, as many companies are, especially in that space now, growing very, very quickly, 2-3 times the size that they were a few years ago. And as a result, obviously, they want to harmonize their business processes across operations and across regions. But as many companies, they kind of grew in a way where the systems didn't necessarily grow with them. So they had a lot of outdated systems, different systems from all around the world. So they wanted to get together and really put together a plan to have global business processes and really leverage the latest technology in the best way that they could. So that was the project, and that's what we started out to do, with the goal of improving the products and services to the customer, and really the customer experience was the main goal.
Right. And how did you get looped in? Not, you didn't start off as an SAP guy. You didn't grow up. I assume you didn't grow up aspiring to be an ERP project manager someday. How do you
I
get
did
to
not. I wanted to be an inventor. So I don't know how I got here. But yeah, I've always been a process guy. So that's always been my thing, optimizing business processes, whether it's a process on the factory floor, or whether it's an operational process, or whether it's a sales process, or anything like that. So I then got into innovation and did some education around innovation and innovation methodologies and how you can frame problems, before jumping to solutions, and how you can really apply solutions that will solve the problem that you're going after. And so I kind of had that background, which was known within the organization, and then a particular gentleman who was the CIO at that stage said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping us frame a problem that we're kind of trying to get our head around here?" So I said, "Sure, that sounds like fun." So I started doing that, and then before we know it, I was leading the global SAP implementation. But it evolved. It evolved from a trying to solve a business problem to implementing the solution that we came up with, and then it kind of became a natural fit for me to keep going with it.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. And so not something you meant to do, but you stumble into it. You take over this project, and I imagine, I guess, how did it feel? Like, how was the beginning months of that project? I'm just curious. Like, I imagine you're drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out what the hell SAP is and what is this whole ERP thing. How do I manage a project like this? It's probably a bit different than what you've done before. How are those early days or weeks or months of transitioning? How did it feel?
Chaotic and scary. It was always the intent for the business to do as much as possible themselves, bring in support from consultants and system integrators, but really to truly own the process of the transformation. And as a result, we recruited a lot of great people from within the business, and brought them onto the team. And they also didn't know anything about SAP. Nobody within the business, none of the business units were on SAP. So SAP was brand new to us. Primarily, we were on a PeopleSoft instance, and a few smaller ERPs and CRMs around the world. So nobody knew anything. We all got swept up in a lot of the sales talk from SAP about how easy it is and how seamless it is, and a lot of the sales talk from system integrators that it'll take a few months and it'll be over. So we didn't know what to believe, what not to believe. We didn't have a structure or much of a game plan. We did know what we wanted to achieve and what our guiding light is, which I think was helpful.
Yeah, that right there. I mean, that last part of what you said, I imagine that was a lifesaver in many ways, just to have that those guiding principles and direction you wanted to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you look at this project that you led, it was tell us a little bit about the scope, if you don't mind. It was
Sure.
not just S/4HANA, but there were certain nuances to it that made it unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So S/4HANA was obviously the kind of single source of truth, the back end or backbone ERP, but it was really all encompassing. So we implemented C/4HANA, which is SAP's CRM, CPQ, which is their configuration price quoting engine, commissions module, field service management. I'm trying to think what else, Concur. So it was really soup to nuts, right? We're all the way from CRM through product selection, configuration, ordering, manufacturing, shipping, finance, obviously, supply chain, warranty, quality, lock, stock, and barrel. We were all in.
Yeah. And when you look back at it now, with the benefit of hindsight, what was the single hardest lesson? If you had to pick one thing that was just the hardest lesson of managing not just a complex ERP implementation, but one that was global in nature like that, what would that lesson be?
Honestly, I think that there's two parts to it. I think that there's a huge people aspect to it. I mean, other than the technology change, and we were implementing, all those modules together. We were the first company to do that around the world. There has been no one else, at least at that time, that was using advanced variant configuration with CPQ integrated with C/4HANA and all the rest. So apart from the technology, there's a huge people aspect to it. And one of the big lessons is, really create relationships early within the organization. Really understand who the key players are within each function and within each region, and spend time with them. Really spend time genuinely getting to know them, what their concerns are, and what their goals and ambitions are. So I think that's really important. And then the other one, I hate the word governance, Eric. I really do, because for me, it's just be organized, right? That's governance. Be organized. Have a process for how you want to manage things like scope items and change requests and defects and requirements, because before you know it, there's going to be thousands or tens of thousands, and you can't manage tens of thousands of items in the same way that you manage 50 or a few hundred.
Right.
So set out a process for how you will manage each of those items, and then have a system beneath it to be able to manage them, because they're going to run away from you very quickly, and it's far more difficult to clean up than it is to do it right the first time. So those are two things that I think I learned kind of the hard way over all of this.
Yeah, I love that second one too. It's cheaper, easier, faster to do it right the first time than to go clean up stuff later. And we see a lot of clients that, and I know you now as a consultant are seeing that on our side at Third Stage Consulting too. How true that can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's an interesting question from Third Stage. Actually, we know them. We work for them. Third Stage Consulting, or someone from Third Stage Consulting on YouTube says, "What shocked you the most about this first project? Is there anything that just sort of not blindsided you, but just it really opened your eyes, really surprised you, or maybe is a little bit more difficult than you thought it would be?"
Yes. So we had gone at that stage with one of the big 5 system integrators, for SAP. And what shocked me the most, and I think continues to shock me sort of 6 or 7 years later, is how many promises are made by many companies around methodology and process that they'll come in with and implement immediately. And it's all kind of smoke and mirrors to an extent. Yes, there is methodology somewhere hidden deep down inside a filing cabinet somewhere, but it's not as cookie cutter as one might think to implement some of these processes. So that was a shock to me. I would have thought that these multi-billion-dollar companies would have it down, they'd have a recipe, but there isn't really one that I've seen.
Yeah. That's interesting. And you guys, I mean, maybe talk about that for a second. You guys started with a large Big Four system integrator, and then you switched midstream. Can you tell us a little bit about that, like how that came to be and how that transition worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the company is a legacy company. They've been around for 80 plus years, and with a company that's that big, a billion-dollar company, there's a lot of inertia, obviously, when you're making a change like this. And when you partner with another very big company or even bigger company, you've got to manage your own inertia as well as theirs, and that can become quite difficult. So with large companies and large system integrators, there's a lot of red tape. There's only so much you can escalate, and so when you do run into problems, and you inevitably will, regardless of how good they are, and they certainly brought a lot of good, right? I don't want to make it sound like it was all negative, because it wasn't. There's a lot of inertia that you've got to manage. You've got to talk to this team, you've got to speak to this person, and then they've got to escalate. And so we switched to a much smaller partner, or a couple of smaller partners, kind of halfway through the project. And many people thought we were nuts. Like, how can you, towards the end of blueprinting, switch system integrators? You guys are lunatics. But it worked out for the better, because they were a much better fit. They were more agile. They were more nimble. They were able to pivot much faster than some of the bigger system integrators had.
Right. Yeah, super interesting. And that seemed to work out well for you guys, right? To switch to that smaller integrator.
It did, especially with what we set out to do, which was to own as much of it as possible. You want a partner that is looking out for your success and that wants you to own it at the end of the day, as opposed to a company that's trying to take as much of it as possible from you.
Yeah. That's a really interesting dynamic and dysfunction between consultant and customer that oftentimes gets overlooked, because the consultants have, if you think about it, and this is true for any consultant, whether it was your smaller consulting firm you worked with or the Big Four, is just maybe more magnified with the Big Four, is they have an economic incentive to take over more of the project for you.
Exactly.
Whereas your incentive is like, no, I want to own this. I want you to teach me. I want you to guide me, but I need to own this at the end of the day, because after they leave, you were still there for a while after those consultants all left, right?
Absolutely, yeah, several years.
Yeah, just a couple comments here on social media here. Galib on LinkedIn says, agreed. Yeah, I cannot talk today. Adaptation is the key metric which determines ERP or CRM project success. It's a good point there. Hello to Ken Hamilton joining on LinkedIn from North Carolina. Here's a question from Dostonian on YouTube. says, have you developed a regular system for managing governance? Your favorite word, managing governance, now that you're a consultant.
Yes. So here's an interesting thing, right? And I was actually talking to a client about this the other day. In my personal life, I'm actually not that organized. Something that my wife complains about regularly. But in my professional life, you have to develop a system of governance and a way of working that is scalable and repeatable and reproducible. And so we're working on it, and that's one of the reasons that I joined Third Stage, is because we do have a different mindset in a way that we want client success. And so the only way to achieve that is really to have clarity and transparency in organization. So I'm building upon the tools that I found here at Third Stage. But I think we can still do a lot better. I think so. So stay tuned. I think that there are things in the pipeline where we can have a governance process with a system and a methodology of implementation that is flexible enough to go from one client to another, but repeatable and rigid enough that you can implement it quickly.
Yeah, and that's the key right there. How can you be repeatable and fast, but also understand that you've got to tailor things or adapt to things that are unique to you as a business, which leads to another question I had, which is, you guys had a global template, right, that you were working from. So you weren't, in other words, you weren't looking to implement S/4HANA and all the associated systems. You weren't looking to implement that with different instances or different variations for each location throughout the world. So how did you find that right balance between the global template approach versus the local flexibility and the nuances and the differences that each country had and preserve?
That's a really good question, Eric. And I saw it obviously in the big SAP project, and I'm seeing it now afterwards as a consultant, that everyone, every region, every department feels that they have that they're unique and that they're special, and many times they're right. So I don't want to discount that. So I think starting right out of the gate, there's definitely legal requirements and statutory requirements from country to country that you've got to be mindful of. I mean, one example is countries like Italy and Mexico require electronic invoicing that gets submitted to the state, for example, right? You don't need that in the United States. You certainly don't want to implement that in the United States if you don't need it. Right. So things like that, I think you have to be flexible right out of the gate. The other thing, though, I think that you need to be mindful of when you're looking at a global template versus regional variation is to not lose your identity in wanting to stick to a global template. I think so. You hear a lot about best practices and processes that should be implemented out of the box. I think that's true for maybe 70% or 80% of the business processes, but understand that there is a secret sauce that the company has, and also a secret sauce that potentially some regions might have. And you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that identity, right? So if you have a go-to-market strategy that is different in Europe compared to the way that it is in North America, don't change that at the detriment of your customers in the name of best practice or global template.
Right. No, it's a really good point. And I think, this industry, the technology industry, I think has a bad habit of convincing customers that they're not that different. Like, hey, you're not different. Like you're not that different from any other engineer to order manufacturing company that has a global operation. So stop trying to be different. Just use our software the way it was built. It's almost like you're the problem, not us. Our software is awesome. Just figure it out. Right. It's best practice. We've got, fit to standard, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel that pressure from your vendor or from maybe even internally, that pressure to just leave the software as it is, use that vanilla software, even if it meant compromising some of that secret sauce that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that, I know SAP is kind of the big bear or the elephant in the room, but they were truly supportive throughout all of this. I mean, we were one of the first, as I said, if potentially not the first, to implement all these systems, and they were truly supportive and truly helpful. But there's always the fear that they make sure you understand that if you deviate in any way from their process, they may or may not support you. Right. So that fear in the back of your head is always driving you to kind of crush any idea of deviating from the standard. So for me, that's the pressure that gets applied from SAPs and probably any other of the big companies. In fact, I know others that have the same tactic. Well, if you're gonna change this process, you're on your own. It may or may not work. And you do see that, right? So you'll put in support requests for SAP or anyone else, and that's the first thing that they'll look at is this stock standard vanilla process? Have you touched it in any way? And if you have, that's the first thing that they try and lean on.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and that's a common dynamic we see too, is that you have, and this isn't just about vendor versus customer. This is actually more of a IT versus business discussion, because I think a lot of times the technologist in all of us recognize and understand the appeal of standard vanilla software. Just deploy it out of the box, off the shelf, and don't change anything. From a technology perspective, that is an ideal state. But the business, where the rubber meets the road, has a different perspective typically. And then you've got to make a compromise or a decision of where am I going to make the trade-off? Am I going to complicate things technologically, or water down and dilute my secret sauce? And usually it's not an either or. Typically it's sort of a continuum you've got to navigate, I imagine.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So here's a question off of TikTok. This is from McGreens on TikTok. Says all ERP systems are designed to ship more product on time. And then I'm going to get to a question here in a second related to this. But then a follow-up comment was, shipments on time is equal to customer service. Your job depends on it. That should be, but that's the measure. So I think what this person's alluding to is sort of the metrics or the end result you get to when you look at what happened with this SAP project post implementation, as you started to see people start to use it and starts to go into operation or into production. What were some of the major benefits you saw? I mean, were there areas where you thought, okay, we really knocked this out of the park and got a lot of business value? And on the flip side, part two of that question would be, were there some parts of the business that you actually might have been a little less efficient because now you're putting more structure in place, you're capturing more data, you might be slowing things down because you're adding a little bit more structure and governance. Tell us a little bit about that, just from a business value perspective, if you don't mind.
It's a multifaceted question. I could spend a long time on it, but I'll try and keep it as short as I can. So yes, there's definitely places where we added value. There's a lot of automation in SAP that came to, that is usable and able to eliminate steps and processes. Also, there's a ton of data that gets collected by SAP from CPQ, from C4, from S4, that you could then use to make better, smarter, more intelligent decisions. But I think that before you get to that value, you have to really understand how to collect that data and what to do with it. So I think that isn't that easy in SAP. It isn't just as simple as being able to pull data and there you go, there's now the insight that you need. So I think from the benefit side, you have that data, you have the potential for a lot of automation, but on the negative side, you have to learn about SAP first, and you have to learn all the nuances, and you have to learn where all that data lies, and you have to truly understand what processes you want to implement versus not implement to actually gain that value. So I think you need to look at it from both sides.
So this is from Teddy on YouTube. Teddy says, to what extent did your technical background come into play within your SAP implementation projects?
It really did. So I'm a mechanical and industrial engineer by education. Industrial engineering is all about business process and process optimization, right? So that was directly beneficial to me, understanding how processes work, value stream mapping, and that sort of thing. But also from a mechanical point of view, my entire career has been spent in manufacturing. And in manufacturing, it's very easy to cloud reasons for inefficiencies. As an operations guy, I know that it's something that gets used all the time. Well, we didn't achieve target because of this, and the other thing. And just having that technical background and understanding certainly helped to see through that. But then also moving over into the software world, I'm no slouch when it comes to understanding technical requirements and technical specifications. So it was a relatively easy transition to start understanding the technical part of ERP implementation as well. But then with that understanding, being able to translate that into business speak, right? So being able to translate the technical specifications and technical capabilities into what is and is not possible from a business process perspective. So I think I was lucky in the background that I have.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a unique background. I mean, we work with a lot of different clients, a lot of different personality types. And I think, the thing that's unique about your background that I think made you really good as a project manager, makes you good as a consultant now, is the fact that you did have that upbringing that wasn't solely focused on enterprise technology. You know, a lot of us, like myself included, I grew up in the enterprise tech space. That's all I know. Whereas you were growing up more as an engineer, you wanted to be an inventor, you just had a totally different mindset or approach. So I imagine layering something new like SAP on top of that foundation was a really solid place to start.
Yeah. It's another technology at the end of the day, right? So whether it's an ERP system or a CRM system or machine automation or machine learning, or a press brake or a laser, it's all technology, and it's all tools that we've invented in order to achieve a goal.
Right.
And that's the lens that I look at it through.
Right. Justonian on YouTube has a follow-up here and says, and accepted by the users. No one likes governance, but everyone needs it, like your home life. And then because I love the audience here because they seem to know that governance is a trigger for you now, and they're going to ask a bunch of governance questions for you now. But here's a question from Ken on LinkedIn. Ken says, is that lack of independent governance practices the primary reason for the 70 to 80% failure rates of digital transformations? If so, how do we communicate the importance to clients? So from a fellow consultant, what are your thoughts here?
I wouldn't want to take a guess as to the percentage. I think that the lack of independent governance practices and structure is a big part of it, yes. But I also think that, from what I've seen, people lose themselves in the transformation. As I alluded to earlier, be careful not to break who you are as an organization in the name of best practice implementation, or in the name of a deadline, or some other sort of fictitious line in the sand that you've drawn. I think that also leads to the 70 or 80% failure rate. So I think it's a combination of things. Certainly the lack of governance has a lot to do with it from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's hard to peg any one thing that's the main driver for failure, or even if you ask me to name 5 reasons, it's like, okay, I could give you 5 that are probably pretty common, probably cover a lot of the failure points, but there's just so many things that go into a success or a failure, and so many variables you've got to get right. It's almost like, from an engineering mindset like yourself, it's almost like you've got to design things in a way that fits that business.
Exactly.
And the way you design your program and your project for your company is probably going to look a bit different than what might be optimal for another company too. And back to your point earlier about methodologies and being able to be flexible but yet repeatable, all that stuff. I mean, that's the tricky part of these projects, is trying to find that right balance.
Right.
So here's a question from Megan on LinkedIn. Megan says, did you ever stray from there? And I think she means SAP's S/4HANA's processes because you believed it was not best for the customer, and was it worth it?
There's one sort of really big one that comes to mind, and it has to do with scheduling. So order scheduling within the plants. SAP has some really cool technology and automation around scheduling. And we implemented it, and what happened was that it created a lot of confusion. This was still in the testing phase, so we weren't live yet, but during testing, there was a lot of confusion around how the system had scheduled orders, how the system had allocated parts to certain orders, how it had reallocated parts from orders to aftermarket orders, and vice versa. And what we found was the technology was just too much for the organization at the time, and it was negatively impacting the customers. So because we weren't able to understand some of the decisions that the system was making around scheduling and order allocation, it started causing confusion and an inability to ship product. And so we actually turned it off, and we went back to a much more manual way of scheduling the plants, with the understanding that we might come back to it when the organization is a little bit more mature. We have a better understanding of SAP. We're more comfortable with the processes. We could then turn on some of that automation again. But for me, that was a lesson that more technology is not always better, and certainly not always better for the customer. And so we ended up turning it off.
Yeah. And did you get kind of blank stares from your consultants in SAP? Just like, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? That makes no sense. I mean, what was the
Not really. Honestly, I think that we had always established ourselves as the leaders in the project, and so we didn't get any blank stares. And I think we made sure that they understand why we're doing it as well. Right? So having consultants is not a bad thing. I'm a consultant. But treat them as part of the family, right? Treat them as someone that's coming in that you can learn from, that you can bounce ideas off of, with the end goal in mind. At some point, they're going to leave, and then it's your baby, right? So I think that we had established that right from the beginning, and so we didn't get too much pushback. I think everyone understood why we were doing it.
Yeah, you make a really interesting. You sort of glossed over it, but I want to hone in on it because it's really important. But you said that the consultants and SAP knew that you guys were leading the project.
Yeah.
I think that's huge because I was engaging in social media. I think it was on LinkedIn the other day, and someone came up with this term. This is not my term, but I love this term. It's a term that they said it sounds like power inversion, where like the vendors and the consultants are leading and telling you what you need to do. And then, you're kind of following them. Whereas you said you did the opposite. And I think that power play, I don't want to call it a power struggle, but you had a clear authority, right? And I think a lot of clients we work with are either afraid, don't have the knowledge, or don't feel confident enough to take that leadership role. How did you guys, I'm just curious to know, like, how and why was that the approach? And I totally agree with it, by the way. I'm not challenging it, but I actually want to hone in on it because I'm trying to figure out what did you guys do differently and why was the organizational behavior internally so different for you guys to where you knew that you needed to take the leadership role, even though you weren't the experts. You had never done an SAP project before. You didn't have all the answers. So how did you get there?
Because we know our customers and our business better than any consultant ever will. And that was an important understanding that we went into the project with. And all those things that you said are true. We were afraid, we were clueless, we were unsure. All of those things were true, but we knew that we knew our customers and our business better than anyone else. And so what we wanted to do is get the expertise and fill the gaps that we knew that we had. We didn't want to hand over our business to somebody else. And that was just a decision that you make right up front, right? Knowing that you're going to be afraid and you're not going to know what to do, but you're still going to be in charge.
What Karm just said there is one of the most important things you might hear in this entire podcast here today. And let me repeat the quote there. I think is really interesting. He said, you're going to be afraid. You're not going to know what to do, but you're still going to be in charge. And I think that is so important. And too often that just gets overlooked. And companies think that because they're afraid and they don't know what to do, or they don't have all the answers right now, they go to the other extreme and say, well, I'll just bring in the SI. I'll go hire Deloitte. I'll hire SAP. I'll hire a big system integrator or someone like that to come in and take over this project and just do it all for me. And it sounds good in theory. Like, it sounds like a lifeline. It sounds like something that's going to bail you out. And it will, for sure. In the short term, it's going to make you feel better. Long term, it's going to be a much higher likelihood of being a disaster for a number of reasons that, that we'll continue to talk about in this discussion. But also I do talk about that a lot in my book, in Welcome to the Machine, which just came out on Amazon. That book, I talk about how that behavioral dynamic of wanting to pass things off to a vendor, to relegate responsibility, just delegate, outsource, whatever you want to call it, that leads to so many bad behavioral problems, to where now you've got a third party that has a vested interest in not doing things effectively or efficiently, because they make more money the harder the project is. And that's the irony of it all. They actually are going to do better by making the project take longer, consuming more hours, billing more hours, et cetera. If for some reason the project gets delayed or things get messy, they win. You don't, but they do. And that's a tricky part. And then you've got the conflict of interest of that the system integrators and the consultants have with their vendors that they represent, because now, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds, and the hand that feeds is going to continue to give you leads, commission. I mean, the amount of money these guys make from the software vendors for recommending and implementing certain products, it's baffling how much money is there. And no wonder you have these weird behavioral issues in the industry, because there's so much money at stake. You throw that much money at people, they're going to start acting weird and doing things that don't make sense. At least from your perspective, they may not make sense. It makes total sense from their perspective. They're trying to make more money, and they do better if they keep the vendor happy and regardless of the outcomes of your project. So, and again, I'm not saying the individuals in these companies for the most part are not bad people, but that's the way the system has been built. So of course you're going to get weird behavior from otherwise normal people, otherwise ethical people. You're going to get stuff that seems shady. And I know when I was at PwC, I felt super weird. I never quite felt comfortable the entire time I was there. It just felt a little dirty, like I just felt like this just doesn't feel right. And so that's, I think, was pretty telling, because, and there was no changing it. Like, I couldn't operate independently outside the machine. The machine is what it is. It's the expectations are set. The incentives are set. You're not going to deviate from that. I tried, and it didn't go well early in my career. I'm surprised I lasted as long as I did there, to be honest, because of that. And the reason I left and the reason I started my own company is because I just couldn't do it anymore. If I wanted to be in consulting, I had to do it a different way. And there weren't any independent tech agnostic firms out there that only represented clients' interest at the time that I started my previous two companies. So that's the lesson there. But I think with getting back to what Karm is saying, you're going to be afraid, you're not going to know what to do, you're still going to be in charge. That's the mindset that separates successful projects from failed projects. Most companies do the opposite. They hire a big consulting firm or integrator. They're intimidated because the consultants all know SAP, and they just hand over the steering wheel. And the problem is that those consultants don't know your business the way you do. And you need that knowledge of your business. I know we're all talking about fit to standard and clean core and software best practices, and don't worry about your current state because you're going to throw it out anyway. That's garbage. That's a highly risky and reckless way to manage a project. So you do have to understand the way things work today. You certainly need to understand the way things are going to work in the future. And you need to understand the gap between the two and what you're going to do to address that gap. And those outside consultants that are focused on building SAP are not looking at your business the way you would, or that an agnostic, someone that's not focused just on technology, the way they would. And you also have to remember that the consultants are going to leave in 18 months. You're going to be living with the system for 10 or 20 years. If all goes well, and if it's a good system and a good deployment, you might end up with that system for 10 or 20 years until, things change and you grow and you need a new system. So the hardest part of these projects aren't the technology. It's getting comfortable being uncomfortable. It's knowing that you can lead without all the answers. It's saying no to a vendor or a Big Four partner when your gut is screaming that something's off. And so it reminds me actually of another client who's been on this podcast before. And he's another person similar to Karm. He has a business background, an HR and operational background, knew very little about ERP and IT in general, but he was handed the keys to this big, massive digital transformation. And he was actually the best person I could imagine. He had all the characteristics you want. He was a strong leader. He knew when to ask questions. Something didn't make sense, he would question it. He wouldn't just say, well, they're the experts, so I'll just defer to them and assume they're right. He very much had a trust but verify mentality. He had ownership. He had extreme ownership and accountability of the project. He wasn't the type that was going to, A, wasn't going to let the SI go off and do their own thing, but B, wasn't going to be the one to, he knew he was going to be held accountable. So he just acted accordingly, and not enough leaders do that. And one example that he did is he actually was able to at one point scale back the overall SI team. So they made a conscious decision and a deliberate decision to slow down the project to extend the timeline. But then they said, by the way, Big Four system integrator, we need you to scale back your staffing because now you're not going as fast as a pace. You don't need that level of staffing to accommodate a compressed timeline that we're not sticking to anymore. So, and that's a really hard conversation to have. And that was a super painful, interesting conversation because the way the Big Four firm resisted that was unbelievable. They pushed so hard to keep the staffing the same, even though they were deliberately materially extending the timeline, knowing that they're going to run at a slower run rate intentionally because they just weren't able to keep up at the pace they were going. And the SI didn't want to do it. And that tells you all you need to know right there. I mean, if you want to do a little social experiment, if you're working with Big Four, any big consulting firm right now, just try it. Just say, hey, what if we doubled the timeline and reduced your staffing in half? See what they say. And, I think you'll get a lot of gaslighting. You'll get a lot of, like, why would you go so slow? Why are you listening to that podcast? Why are you listening to Transformation Ground Control? They're not speaking the way we want, the things we want you to hear. So, I'm being somewhat facetious, but if you've ever had that conversation, I've seen it enough in my career to know how much blowback you get from vendors if you try to push back. So, lesson here though is it doesn't matter. It's not about making friends here. It's not about keeping your Big Four, your big system integrator happy. It's about owning the project and knowing that you're going to live with the outcomes when all is said and done and all the consultants leave the room. So own it, even when you're afraid. We've got a lot more to cover though. I want to keep going here with this conversation with Karm, and unfortunately I've left him waiting for a few minutes here. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book And it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Karm, Saliba. We're talking about SAP implementations and lessons from one particular global SAP implementation. You know, for those listening that have not been through an ERP implementation before, that's something I would really think about is like, how can we navigate the fact that we are afraid, we don't know, we don't have the answers, and you're bringing in these experts. In some cases, it can be intimidating and overwhelming to where they do know, they do have the answers about the technology. They've done this a million times. And so you want to, like you said, you want to bounce things off of them, make them part of the family, but you have to have that clear reporting structure that says, you know, Karm is in charge of this project. He's ultimately going to decide what's right for this business, not the vendor, not the consultants. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people in the technology space really struggle with that. I think they want to be like, I'm the technologist. Let me do this for you, Mr. or Mrs. Client. Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting. Dostonian says, just to finish the trigger, I'd offer that it is a business process governance versus pure data governance. You have to stay true to who you are and how you get there. So very much validating, echoing what you just said. But here's an interesting follow-up question for you from what you were just saying, Karm, and that this is from Mukund on LinkedIn. I apologize for butchering your name. Why aren't we able to tailor the experience, in this case, your scheduling example, exactly to the clients, the way of working, rather than then taking them into a new method of scheduling? So, you know, help us understand that. Was this a functionality in that example you were talking about with scheduling? Yeah. Was that a functionality gap? Was it just a different way that SAP handles scheduling and it just didn't work for you guys? Or maybe
no, it wasn't a functionality gap at all. In fact, it was the complete opposite. I don't know what the opposite of a gap would be, but I think you can
do more than you needed. Is that
it was too much. It was a situation where we were handing over a lot of the control. So even before we went to SAP, you know, obviously we had ERP systems and there was technology involved in scheduling, but there was a lot of manual work that gets done in scheduling, understanding lead times of long lead time components, and understanding which orders are coming in first and more important and more time sensitive, etc. So there were a lot of decisions that were being made manually, which we had tried to hand over to SAP, right, into SAP algorithms. And that was just too much for the organization. So it wasn't a situation where there was a technology gap. It was just too much to hand over to the technology at that time. And could we tailor it? Well, I mean, that's exactly what we did, right? So we didn't switch off SAP. We just took certain decisions that were being made systematically and reverted them to people decisions again, and then fed those answers back into the system again. So we kind of bypassed some automation within SAP. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, we did exactly that. We did tailor the process to the business. But in this case, it was removing functionality as opposed to adding.
Yeah. And that's an important nuance too, because I think that's okay. It's like you buy the Cadillac. In this case, you guys bought a Cadillac. You don't need every feature and option. Just like when you buy a car, you don't necessarily want the loaded thing that has every possible feature that you're never going to use.
Right.
And but I think again, the technologist in us all says, no, but that scheduling capability is so cool. You should look at all this automation you could get from it.
It is.
And it's hard to get it. It's hard to get unstuck from that
yeah.
conflict or that tension that you feel over that.
Yeah. You can't, I mean, you can't have a Ferrari for your first car because you're probably going to crash it.
Right. It's a good point. Yeah. I'm my 16-year-old son just started driving, and that terrifies me to think about him driving a Ferrari.
Yeah.
So here's a question and this actually gets to a thread I was going to get into. So I'm going to point to my question, and I'm going to combine my question with one of the audience members here. But I want to talk about resistance to change or potential end user employee resistance in general, especially in a global environment. Now, first of all, I'm guessing it's not true that everyone was totally on board with this, excited. They're ready to change. They're ready for the American headquarters project team to come in and tell us how we're going to change our business. I imagine that ruffled some feathers. Tell us a little bit about just sort of your general experience there, and then I've got a follow-up question for you on that.
I think it's true. Look, I think the leadership was great, and there was alignment at the leadership level across all functions and across all regions. So I think that was a good start, and something that I would certainly encourage every organization to make sure that they have. But yeah, they were. It's I've heard the analogy before that if you're a Samsung person and you have the latest Samsung phone, and then somebody takes it away from you and gives you the latest iPhone, you're going to have a problem with it. And it isn't because necessarily iPhone is better or Samsung is better. It's just because you're used to one over the other. And you'll find reasons, the iPhone can't do this, and the iPhone and the Samsung could do that. They're probably true. So listen to the people when they tell you, the new system can't do this, the old system can't do that, because there is truth in that. But much of it is around navigating the people's comfort, understanding what it is that they actually need to do their job. And then walk with them, right, as they understand the new processes. Make sure that they understand that they're still going to be able to do their job in the best and easiest way. And it might be different, but it's not necessarily worse. And if it is worse, have the confidence to acknowledge that and potentially change course in what you're doing. So listen to the people that are crying. Sometimes you'll be able to win them over. Sometimes you won't.
Right. And then the follow-up question here from Glebe that ties directly into what you just said, Karm, is one question on adoption. How do you win over legacy loyal users who find old systems more convenient? Maybe I'll take it one step further and just build on what you just said too, is not only might your old systems be more convenient, but what about those cases where your legacy system was actually better for you? You're putting in this new capability that maybe it's watering down that process or making it a little bit more complicated or less ideal, but it's in the name of a broader good. It's helping enable other upstream or downstream workflows. Like how did you guys tell us a little bit about that? How did you overcome that?
So be critical in the battles that you fight. And so I think that there are some instances where the legacy loyal people actually have a point, and where it is a competitive differentiator for the business. Have a look at how you can keep that, even if it means stepping outside of the process or the system rather. I mean, with the advent of AI and AI coding, you can build sub-processes and applications that can tie into your ERP system, which allows you to keep your competitive advantage by not sticking to the standard vanilla process. And in others where, you do feel that we need to stick to the template over here, understand that the people that are legacy loyal are just that they're people, they're human beings, and you're changing the way that they've probably done business for many, many years, and that's why they're so adamant about it. So make a connection with them, spend time with them, work on the shop floor, work in the accounts payable department, actually spend time with them working through their process and understand the pain that they're feeling. And I think that once they see that you understand it too, then you can get to a point where you can get to an agreement, whether that's changing the system or the process, or whether it's them adopting the new process.
Right.
You're not going to win all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially in a diverse global organization with thousands of people, those are thousands of different opinions and mindsets that you've got to figure out how to change or get on board. What about from looking more regionally and geographically at this? Did you guys have certain examples or certain instances where, one country just was really resisting the change, or maybe you really were truly watering down or making things more difficult for them, but you needed them to be on a common platform. So, sort of a trade-off. Did you have anything like that was a big deal for you guys?
We did, and I'm smiling because I'll make sure to avoid what country or region I'm talking about.
I'll try to guess.
Resistance.
Try to offend everyone on the call here.
Yeah, exactly. Resistance shows itself in many different ways. Okay, so it's not always going to be somebody banging their fist on the table saying, "I don't want to do it." Sometimes resistance might look like a region or a department going along with you and then saying that they're gonna do what the global template says. And then you'll find afterwards that they've developed an entire shadow process or shadow system to work around you. So that's one way that resistance could show itself. Another one is, somebody banging their fist on the table and saying, no, they're not going to do it. Unless you meet every one of their requirements, they're not going to change. Another one could be where they try and, win you over and persuade you why their idea is better than yours. So I think you've got to be adaptable when it comes to facing resistance like that, and understanding what it is that you're dealing with, and then tailoring your approach based on the specific case, right? So in the case of a region that says that they've adopted a process, go and follow up afterwards. Spend time with them after the fact and kind of do an audit to make sure that they're adopting the process.
Right.
So there's many different ways that you'll face resistance, and you've got to tailor your approach. There's no one size fits all, and I think that's the message here is don't try and make it one size fits all. Again, you're dealing with people.
Right. Well, as badly as I want to ask you, tell us which country was the hardest one from a resistance to change perspective. But I won't ask that, partially because I think I know which country you're talking about. It just because I knew you guys at the time and you were client bars. But I'm not going to go there. Anyway, what about when you're in the planning and design phase of these sorts of projects? Like, were there any lessons you had from the early stages, like things that you did well that really set you up for success, or things that you wish you would have done differently during the planning and design phase that would have better enabled success?
Yeah, I think from a technical point of view, don't underestimate data in any way. I think a lot of organizations do. I think a lot of organizations see it as a secondary thing to the process. It is not. So set up a framework around data ownership. And then set up a team, because no matter how much effort and energy you put into data up front, it's going to require rework after go live. It is. It's just going to, whether it's the customer master or vendor master or materials or you name it, it's going to require rework afterwards. So set up a team that truly understands the data and understands implications of decisions that you make around data, and have that team at the ready and bring them along with you right from the beginning. So I think that's one very important aspect to consider.
Yeah, data is becoming more of a discussion point here in recent years. It's always been a big deal. I mean, I could go back 10 or 20 years of my career and people were talking about data, but now it's just different because not only do people have more data accumulated that they've hoarded, as an organization, they don't know what to do with it. Yeah. But now with AI and analytics and all that stuff, it's becoming exposed. You're exposing the fact that you don't have good data. And when did you guys start data? Like, was data on your critical path in the project? Did it cause any delays? Did it push things out beyond what you would have otherwise
Um,
experience?
it did. It did. So we did have some delays as a result of data not being ready. But I think that the biggest lesson or the biggest hit that we got was after go live, where you extract data and you cleanse and you transform and you load it to the way that you think it's going to work. You don't really test the process with all different kinds of data. You usually test it with data that you know is good, and so you get hit by it after go live. So I think that's where we kind of learned the biggest lessons is make sure that you have a plan in place to be able to make fixes while the company is running with
Right.
data, because that's where the rubber really meets the road.
Right. Right. And speaking of doing all this stuff while the company is running, how did that affect your resources, your internal resources, your internal ability to support the project, the internal ability to make decisions quickly? How did your day-to-day operations and realities affect the idealistic state, of a project where in a perfect world you would have unlimited resources and access to information right when you needed it? Like, how'd you guys balance that, or what were some of the challenges you had there?
Well, it's a really good point, because when you start at a project like this, people are, they'll give you resources and they'll say everything's fine and go ahead and use the best people. But then as the project progresses and when days turn into months and months turn into years, those people typically get consumed back into the business. And so just keeping the lights on, tends to take priority then over the project after several years. In the beginning, yes, this is the number one most important thing, and everyone's all about it, but that tends to fade over time. So you have to, again, in the same way that you would with data, establish a process team. A team of individuals that are dedicated to business process optimization, that are permanent members of this team. And don't see it as an ERP implementation team. See it as a business process optimization team. Because especially in today's world of complexity and ambiguity, you need it.
Right.
It's not a temporary thing.
So that's a really interesting point that you make, Karm. And here's a quick myth buster for what we've been talking about here in the last few minutes. And that is that best practice is not best for you. When a vendor says just use the standard process, it's best practice. What they're really saying is that's the way the software was built, and that's what's easiest for us to support. There's no such thing as best practices. I'm just tired of that word. I'm tired of arguing with people on whether or not it exists. Now, I do think, now to be fair, I do think there's technology best practices in terms of how you, architecture maybe, or like how you build cybersecurity protocols. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about business best practices, like vendors that say that their workflows, their business processes are best practice. That is not true. It's just not. It's in my opinion, it's undisputable. You can't. There's no logical way that is true. There might be some processes that work really well for you that are big improvements for you. It doesn't make it best practice. There's going to be some that are watered down, oversimplified processes that don't fit the complexity of your business. That's not best practice. It's the way the software is built. It might be the way they deployed it with another company that was sort of like you. Still doesn't make it best practice. And when you think about your competitive advantage and the things that make you different, you need to listen to that. You need to look at that, because vendors have this uncanny way of making you the problem. When I say vendors, I mean the software vendors, the system integrators, the ERP consultants. They have this way of making customers feel like they're the problem. You don't want to change. You don't want to follow best practices. You're resisting change. So those are all things you've just got to be aware of, and we've got to get past that as an industry, because it's getting old, and the collateral damage that it's causing is I think there's enough evidence to suggest that we need to stop using the word software or business best practices, because they don't exist. And what's best practice in SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or any other ERP is a generic process designed to work for the average customer in the average industry. And you are probably not average. You're probably not an average company. Now, I know consultants also love to say you're not that special. You're not that different. Well, you are. Okay. There's some things that you do that are intentionally different, intentionally strategic, intentionally competitive. Now, there's probably some things you're doing that aren't so bright. You could be doing better. Yeah, there was a convoluted process that needs to be simplified. I'm not saying just pave the cow paths and leave everything the way it is, but you need to understand the difference between the two, the processes that are ripe for improvement and the ones that where maybe you actually have the best practice for you, and you need to figure out how to preserve and build on that, not throw it out and start over with what a software thinks is best practices or a software vendor thinks is. So if you were average, you'd be out of business, especially, talking about the other than the public sector, any for-profit company would be out of business if their goal was to be average and be just like everyone else, use the same system, the same processes. It's not sustainable. It doesn't make sense. So the competitive advantages are the things you do differently. That's your secret sauce. Now, here's the nuance with what Karm said, though. He got this part exactly right. About 70 to 80% of your processes should probably follow standard best practice. So, okay, if you want to call it best practice, I wouldn't call it best practice. I still think it's just the way the software is built, and the way it was built may be brilliant and it may be perfect for you. That's great, but it still doesn't mean it's best practice. So when you look at things like AP, AR, basic financial close, okay, sure, use the standard functionality. But when you've got that 20 to 30% that makes you've got to defend that. Even if the vendor presses you, even if the system integrator, rolls their eyes and says you're not different, you shouldn't be different. Why are you doing this different? Even if it costs you more, it might cost you more. It might introduce more technical complexity, but that might be necessary in order to preserve those best practices. So if you flatten everything into vendor-defined best practices, you didn't change your business, you just commoditized it. And so, then you say, well, congratulations, you just paid millions of dollars to look just like your competitors. And no one wants that. So best practice isn't necessarily best for you. Understand where best practices do apply and where they don't. And where they don't, that's where the risk is. That's where the cost is. That's where these projects come off the rails, because you didn't plan for that 20 to 30% where standard functionality isn't necessarily going to fit. So that's what I think about that. I'm sticking with it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back more. We're going to jump back into this conversation with Karm. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Psst, this guy sucks. This is the new unified procurement dashboard. Real-time visibility, AI-driven insights, fully configurable to the... quick question. Yeah, absolutely. Is that a stock photo on your demo slide? It's a placeholder, yeah. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so as you can see, the system handles three-way match automatically. How does it handle it when the vendor sends the invoice before the receipt? Great question. The system flags it for review, and then what if the receipt is wrong? Well, you can adjust the receipt what if the receipt is wrong and the invoice is wrong, but in a different way? Well, that's an edge case. We'll handle that in configuration.
Configuration, huh? Let me show you the approval workflows. Is your name really Braden? Yes, it is. Oh, cool. No, that's cool. Okay, so approvals are fully automated based on rules that. Hey, Braden, quick thing. On slide 4, you had a typo. Receive I before E. I'll flag that with marketing. Well, if the slides have typos, what does the code look like? Let me walk through the reporting module. Is this a live system or a demo environment? This is our demo environment populated with sample data. So we're not actually seeing how it performs under real load. Well, in production, just something to keep in mind, guys, okay? The reporting module pulls real-time data across. My spreadsheet does that. I'm sorry? Just saying. We already have something that does that for free that I built. Any other questions? Yeah, one last thing. I just want to tell the group here that I think we owe it to ourselves to really think about whether we need all this. I'll send my spreadsheet around first thing in the morning. So that's Spreadsheet Guy. If you haven't been following, it's a new short series. I started on Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. A fun way, or it's meant to be a fun way to poke fun at that person in every organization that resists change the way it is. And I think, the good thing about Spreadsheet Guys, I think he exposes some of the organizational dysfunction in a lot of organizations and that resistance to change. They need to balance the way things are versus the way things could be, and the need for change management, because the guys like that, like Spreadsheet Guy, they'll continue to be a nuisance until you address it. And unfortunately for leaders, most resistance is not quite as obvious as Spreadsheet Guys. I mean, he's sort of he's being very passive aggressive. He's disruptive, in a demo environment, or I've done other videos where it's during training or different phases of a project. And that can be a challenge. And usually it's a lot more subtle, though. And that's the problem with change management, or that's the challenge with change management, is it's usually a lot more subtle. And, the other thing that this ties back to that Karm was just talking about is how more technology isn't necessarily better. He talked about how you bought SAP's most powerful scheduling capability, implement it, but then you turned it off because the company wasn't ready. And so many system integrators would have said, why? That's a terrible idea. Don't do that. And I think it's important because it also shows a strong leadership. I'm not even going to debate whether or not it was the right decision, because honestly, it doesn't matter if that was the right decision. I mean, it sounds like it probably was, but that's not the point. The point is they did what they thought they needed to do for their business. It wasn't them being resistant to change. It wasn't them being stubborn. It wasn't them not listening. They said, look, we tried it. It doesn't fit. We're not ready for it. Let's table it. We'll come back to it later. We've got a process now that works pretty well. So it's interesting because they configured the advanced automated scheduling, which is one of the most powerful features in SAP. And I'm sure, it might have watered down their business case. I'm sure the consultants were not pleased that was getting cut, because that might be one of their favorite parts of the system. And during the testing, they realized it couldn't handle it. So they shut it off and went back to manual scheduling. So that just takes a lot of guts, takes a backbone. It takes a strong spine. Most companies and leaders don't do it. They get into the sunk cost fallacy where they just keep at it. They figure they'll just power through. They paid for it. They might as well use it. And they sometimes don't want to admit that they're not ready to the steering committee, to the vendor, to the consultants. But the lesson is pretty clear. The goal of a transformation isn't to use every feature that your software can do. The goal is to run your business better. Now, I'm not saying be like Spreadsheet Guy and just keep using spreadsheets. There's obviously a fine line here. And you have to be careful because it's a slippery slope. Because if Spreadsheet Guy were working at Karm's company, he probably would have pounced on that and said, see, SAP sucks. We shouldn't be doing this project. We should be using my spreadsheets instead, because the axis of power lies more with Spreadsheet Guy if things stay the same, because he's such a central part of the current state, and he's threatened by that. He's going to be disrupted by it. So back to Karm, though, and back to the SAP implementation, the goal is not to use every feature. It's to make your business run better. And I liked his analogy a lot too, where he talks about how you can't have a Ferrari for your first car because you're going to crash it. And SAP's like a Ferrari, and some might argue with that and say, well, it's not a Ferrari. It's more like a Cadillac, or whatever you want to call it. But, the analogies aside,
you don't need the highest end software necessarily. You might need to start with a Camry and then work to a Ferrari over time, and then turn features on as you need to and as you go. And also, it's an important part of not biting off more than you can chew. Here's a different kind of comment or question. I'll convert it into a different spin here from Teddy on YouTube. It says there are some papers pointing to a massive cloud migration up ahead as ECC and R3 support is about to end. Are you already seeing it in the projects on your side? And I would just say yes to that. We absolutely are. But I want to flip it into a question for you, Karm, in that you are describing a process that happened several years ago. Like you guys were a relatively early adopter of S/4HANA. So you guys are implementing proactively, strategically. You're not doing it because you're, SAP, you weren't on ECC, you weren't being forced by SAP to upgrade to S/4HANA.
Right.
But a lot of companies are out there. They've got this 2030 deadline they're staring down. And let's just say, let's put yourself in this hypothetical scenario. You're in the same role you were several years ago. You decide you're going to, except you're using ECC, but now you're going to be implementing because you have a deadline. You've got to get live on S/4HANA by 2030. It's 2026 right now.
Yeah.
We see a lot of companies that are rushing, they're panicking a little bit. They're rushing. They're just trying to cut corners and just try to get the new system stood up and live in out of fear of support being cut off for their legacy system. I don't sense that you guys had that sort of time constraint. I mean, you had urgency. I mean, there's a reason you were doing it like you talked about, but it wasn't like there was a time-based constraint to it. Would that, and I know this is totally hypothetical, but if you were now in today's day and age starting over exactly where you were, would you have to, like, how would you have navigated that? I'm just curious, like, what would you have done? Would it have forced you to compress some things or cut some things that you did right in the implementation you did?
No, I don't think so. I think that when we did this, it was always about, and this is another catchphrase that I dislike is MVP or minimum viable product. But really what that boils down to is understanding your business and understanding the processes that are key to your business, and focusing and spending your time and energy there. And I think whether you're on a burning platform or not, that should be the approach that you take. And you spend 80% of your time on 20% of the processes that really matter to the business. That's not to say that the other 3,000 processes don't matter, but they're not going to matter as much as a handful of true key processes for your business. And focus and spend your time on those, because if you get those right, you do have time afterwards to come back and fix up all the others. But if you get those wrong, you're going to hamstring your business and impact your customers.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I hope people listening that are facing this 2030 deadline and feeling a sense of panic or urgency or whatever you want to call it, I hope they take that advice into consideration, because that's really, really good advice. Dostonian on YouTube says you really love governance, you just haven't realized it yet.
Probably.
So we're just
it's the word I don't like. The concept I love.
Yes. It's just okay. That's interesting. The word governance is a trigger for you. It's kind of like, for me, I have certain ones too, like agile or best practices. Like anytime I hear those words, it's like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny that we just are not going to let this governance thing go an hour into this conversation or whatever. Here's an interesting question, and I know this doesn't apply to you at Baltimore Aircoil, but this is from Teddy on YouTube. Says, have you ever encountered a failure leading to giving up the implementation of SAP? What was the main reasons to that? I can speak to myself, and then maybe you could speak to, what you've seen too, Karm, in your short consulting career so far. But we have seen this quite a bit. And I think the biggest thing with this is, we've seen a lot of failed or canceled S/4HANA projects, but it's really not because S/4HANA as a product is a bad product. I mean, it's actually a really good product. There's a lot of cool capabilities, a lot of power in it. But I think the problem is so many companies don't have the fortitude and the budget and the time and just the stomach to see it out. I mean, because it's a painful process, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time. And we see a lot of clients that get halfway through and say, well, what have we gotten ourselves into? Like, this is going to cost more than we thought. It's going to take more time. But again, it's not an S/4HANA problem. It's more of an expectation setting problem. It is a governance problem. I'm not going to be able to let go of the word governance. But it's a change management resistance problem. So there's a lot of headwinds you're going to face. And a lot of times companies just, I hate to say give up, but it fizzles out. They run out of money. They run out of time, fortitude, whatever you want to call it. What are your thoughts on that, Karm? Why do you think some companies cancel their projects or just bail out on it completely?
I couldn't agree with you more. And just obviously I wasn't involved with some of the very famous SAP failures, like Hershey and Little and others. But for me, I find those interesting because SAP does have that functionality, right? It has the functionality that is needed, and it's about what you choose to adopt and what you choose not to adopt. And I think that these projects that do fail, they're not a technology problem, as you exactly said. It's a business process problem. It's an adoption problem. It's an understanding of the business problem and how the technology fits into your business.
Right. And that right there that's the key. And that's a lot more difficult than just deploying technology. Because if all we had to do is deploy technology, these projects would not fail. I mean, I think we'd have 99.9% success rates. We wouldn't be talking about all the failures. But the problem is what you just described. And I think a big problem too, and I'm curious to hear if any of your leadership might have struggled to see this too, is did your leadership at BAC, did they understand how difficult it was going to be, or was it a surprise to them? Did you have to convince them or educate them a lot, or how did your leadership approach this whole thing?
I think the higher up you go in an organization, the more philosophical things become. Right. So yes, the leadership that did have an understanding, it does have an understanding of how difficult the project was. But I think that they would never, and they should never, understand some of the true technical difficulties that were encountered. And they're more interested in some of the people and organizational challenges that we had. So I think you're getting bombarded from, with challenges from all over the place. Make sure that your leadership understands some of the people and organizational challenges and shield them a little bit from some of the technical challenges. Also, the technical challenges, are usually easier to solve. So it doesn't necessarily need to go all the way up to the executive leadership.
So here's a contrarian view from what Karm was just talking about related to switching system integrators mid-project. I thought that was this is pretty powerful type stuff that he was just saying. And it's going to make some CIOs and project managers uncomfortable. And it's going to make some big system integrators uncomfortable too. But sometimes the right move is to fire your system integrator mid-project. I know, it's hard to have that conversation. It's hard to say that. It's hard to, it's easy to not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater first and foremost. But it's something that may need to be done. Now, I want to share with you a meme that I shared on social media recently, and this is related to just something I shared on social media that captured a bit of attention and conversation. But it's a picture of a CIO at the top, and it says when a CIO first hires SAP and Accenture, and then down below the same meme shows the same guy. He's in a suit. At first, he's in a suit. He looks nice. He's well kept. And then below, he appears to be homeless, and he's holding a sign that says "Will work for tech," and it says 2 years after a CIO hires SAP and Accenture. So, obviously, I'm poking fun. This is hyperbole. I apologize to SAP and Accenture, people that work for SAP or Accenture. This is not meant to be necessarily just a direct reflection on you individually, or even for these two companies. The point here is that there's this misconception in the industry and among leaders, especially, that if I just hire a big name vendor and a big name SI, I'm good. I'll be okay. And, they say no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, Accenture, SAP, Deloitte, Oracle, Microsoft, whoever. Insert big name here. There's a mindset, a false perception of safety that I would argue might actually be more risky to go down that path. And so that's the reason I put this meme out, is because I thought, why not? What about the flip side? Because people say it all the time. I hear it all the time. Like, no one ever got fired for this or that. But I can always name people that have been fired. I'll give you a list of names that have hired any big name if you'd like. I mean, actually, I wouldn't do that because I wouldn't want to implicate any clients or people I've worked with over time. But hopefully you get the point here that there's always going to be people that have been fired for making decisions they thought were safe, but they actually weren't good fits or good decisions. Or maybe the decision itself was fine, but they didn't manage the big name vendors. So, Karm glossed over it. So, not intentionally, obviously I'm not criticizing him for this, but he sped past it. I didn't really come back to it in the way I'd like. So I want to just chat about it just for a minute. But if we pause and think about what they did, they were halfway through blueprinting, millions of dollars in, hundreds of decisions in, with a big four firm, and then they switched to a smaller partner. And this is a small partner that I had never heard of, by the way. They're not a no-name firm, but I had never heard of them. I think they had maybe a couple thousand consultants. So they're not tiny, but they weren't hundreds of thousands like their previous system integrator. And on paper, you might think, well, these guys are lunatics. What was Karm thinking? They're being leaders. I mean, they did what they needed to do. They found a better cultural fit. And most failed projects had warning signs in the first 6 months. And these guys, the difference here is these guys recognize it. They caught it. They pivoted. They didn't just power through. They weren't convinced by their SI just to, stay the course and keep doing what was not working in the first place. And so the team felt off. Decisions were getting escalated through layers of red tape. They all knew it, but they knew that staying with the wrong partner would be harder than the pain of switching partners. And so if you're 3 months into a multi-year project, your gut's telling you the partnership isn't working, you got to trust your gut. It's going to be a lot more pain and cost and damage if you wait until 18 or 24 months in, something that you knew or should have known in the first few months. So the big logos don't save projects to the right people. The right partner does, the right governance of the people and the partners do. And so you want to make sure that I'm not saying everyone go fire your SI, but if you don't feel like you've got the right fit, if it's not a good cultural fit, if they're not listening to you as much as they need to, then it could be time to make a change. And at the very least, if you do stick with your SI, which I imagine most of you will probably stick with who you have, then I would say at the very least, make sure you've got really strong governance around that as well. And we'll continue to talk about that through the conversation as well. Yeah, I mean, the technology, it either works or it doesn't, not to oversimplify it, but I mean, the data flows, the buttons work, the transaction posts to the GL or it doesn't, it's pretty easy to spot the problems there, but the trickier stuff as well, it works, but Jimmy over in accounting isn't putting the data in the system or, and all that stuff trickles down throughout the entire process. And then all of a sudden everyone's blaming SAP or S4HANA or their ERP system because it sucks. The data's wrong. Well, maybe Jimmy's the problem. Maybe Jimmy did something wrong and we got to train him on how to do it.
That's such a great point, Eric. So this transformation really just highlights issues and inefficiencies in the organization that were there all along. It just kind of brings them to light. It brings it to a head. And I think that's what a lot of people will notice.
Yeah. Very interesting. What about if you could looking back on your SAP journey at Baltimore Air Coil, knowing what you know now, you're so much less naive and less young than you were back when you started that project. You got the gray. We talked about that. We're both starting to get the gray going here in our beards. Now that you've got that wisdom and that experience, what would you change or what would you do different if you go back and get a mulligan and try it over again?
I've been asked that question so many times, and I've done a number of calls with for SAP as well, just as a reference for them and to help other organizations that are starting out in this journey. And everyone asks that question, and I thought about it a lot. And it's the same question that I ask myself about my life. Going back and what would I change? And I always get stuck on the same thing, which is the issue of causality, and that some things you have to make those mistakes in order to end up where you are. And so, maybe, I started out my education studying physics, and then I changed over to engineering. And sometimes I look back and I think, I really would have loved to be a physicist, but if I did that, then I wouldn't have gotten the job that I did. So I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have had the kids that I have. So, are there things that I've learned in this journey of SAP that I would do better next time? Yes. But I don't think that I would fundamentally change too much, because I think that part of a digital transformation is the transformation part itself, not the end goal. And so a lot of the hardships, a lot of the challenges that we faced as a project team and as an organization actually ended up to a more robust organization, an organization that is able to adapt to challenges better than it did before. And so, yes, I would put in a better data team up front. I would be more critical of the best practice processes, rather than just implementing them. I would spend more time with key stakeholders. But those are all sort of improvements to things that we did during the transformation, not a fundamental change in how we went about it. Really the important thing is understanding what the end goal is, and making sure that you have the flexibility and continued vision to get to your end goal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It made me think of that. Did you ever see that movie Butterfly Effect from, I don't know, it was like 15 or 20 years ago?
Probably. I think so, yeah.
But it's basically the whole premise is what you said. I mean, every little decision or thing you do has, a domino effect. And if you change one thing, it could totally change the outcome of
Exactly.
civilization or whatever. But as you were saying this, I was like, man, that's a good point, because if you had done everything perfectly, you might not have hired Third Stage. I would have never met you, and then you wouldn't be here at Third Stage working, and then you wouldn't be helping this, this big project you're helping us with right now. That wouldn't be happening right now. And so you think about all these, butterfly effect or causal.
Exactly.
It's pretty.
So you could take a different path, but at the end of the day, you're still going to make mistakes. It's not about going back and not doing those mistakes. It's about being adaptable when you do make mistakes. And truly understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve, and being laser focused on that end goal, not on how you achieve the end goal.
Yeah. But I think, one thing that you guys had, and I had a front row seat to this just because you guys were a client, and I got to the privilege of being involved early on in your journey. But one thing I noticed about you guys then, and you're validating and building on it more now, which is you guys had a philosophy that was unique. You had a leadership mentality and a extreme ownership mentality. You just had all these philosophical or cultural principles in place that I think are arguably more important than did you execute perfectly? Did you have the perfect plan? Did you really know what you were doing? None of that stuff really mattered, because you guys had the foundational, I don't want to say governance, but it was sort of like from the top down. You had that. You had that all in place, and makes me wonder if you didn't have that, that might have given you a different answer, a different experience, or something totally different outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the vision.
Yeah, and a lot of this lesson here, and I think a lot of the challenge for a lot of people listening here, especially those that are not CIOs, they're not executive sponsors, they're not the ultimate decision maker on these projects. A lot of challenge for them is, well, how do I get my leadership to understand that stuff is so important when, maybe it's not the easy answer or whatever. And that leads to, the last question I've got for you is, if I'm an executive, and whether I'm an executive sponsor, maybe I'm on the steering committee, somehow involved in one of these transformations, what are the 2 or 3 things you tell them to focus on that they might be underestimating or may not understand, that you think is really important from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. I've seen, it's always, there's always 2 kinds of people, right? But I have seen 2 kinds of leadership styles. One where, everything has to go down without a hitch. We can't have any disruptions. We can't take any steps back. We have to go live on this date. And then on the other end of that spectrum, I've seen leadership where, it's okay. And, the dates are allowed to slip as much as they want, and we're allowed to change whatever we want. And there's no kind of line in the sand. And so really my advice to senior leadership who are going into a project like this is, understand that there is a spectrum and it is a continuum, and you do have to be on one side or the other side at different aspects or different parts of the project. There are going to be times where, even if we're not going to be ready for SIT in time, you still need to say, we're going to have SIT on whatever, June the 15th. And kind of put that line in the sand, even though you might think that it's unrealistic in the back of your mind. And then there are other times where you have to understand that things are good enough, and that they're not gonna be perfect. And be humble enough to understand that, and then be wise enough to know when to be that kind of leader, because your organization is going to need that level of flexibility from you.
Right. That's really well said. Good advice. Well, I want to thank you for joining here today. Thank you, Karm, for being here. Really appreciate your time and discussion. I appreciate the audience feedback and questions. As always, new episodes every week, transformationgroundcontrol.com. Check it out. Every Wednesday, we have new episodes. You can find it on all the major platforms. Check out my new book, available now, Amazon, ships anywhere in the world, physically or electronically. A lot of what we talked about here today is unpacked in this book. Gives you a roadmap for how to understand the machine and how to navigate the machine to ensure that your change initiatives are successful. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care, and we'll see you soon.